I decided recently that I wanted to add a new level to my snowboarding game to make the game a little bit meatier and to give the player a little bit more to do. But if I just have 100 identical levels, then that's sort of counterproductive because the player is going to get really bored really quickly. So my two goals for this new level were to make it look distinct and make it play distinctly? I don't know. Anyway, the idea that I landed on for this was to have an environment where the snow is melting and there's a lot of exposed grass that you need to avoid. Whereas other levels are very crisp with lots of jumps, I wanted this one to look really ragged and push the player to use the lane changing mechanic that I had recently introduced. So it would have a lot of obstacles on the course, these patches of grass because of the melting snow, and some obstacles would even be present on the ramps, which is something that doesn't exist in any of the other levels. The problem is, my level notation, which I designed, and the parser that goes with it, which I also wrote, is busted, or at least it's insufficient for what I want to do. I can only do one type of obstacle, these gray things. They don't look grassy at all, they look gray. They look like ice or snow or just gray, I'm not sure. That's no good, we need grass. And I can't do multiple obstacles in a row, I can only do one at a time. And I definitely cannot put obstacles on ramps. That is not something that is even remotely possible given my current notation. This thing that I built, I won't say that it sucks, but it's definitely not enough, and it's really limiting my ability to make the level that I want to make. So today, we're going to go on a journey together. I'm going to show you how we can expand this level notation and make it more flexible, more extensible, but also make it easier to use for ourselves. And I'm going to show off some of the under the hood parts of the game that I haven't really talked about until now. So that's the relatively long cold open. I guess we should probably get started with the main part of the video. Hello and welcome. My name is Eric. I work on small indie game projects, and this channel is where I jot down some notes on what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. This is Radical Slice. So we can take a quick look at how the current level format works. I've made a tiny level just for us to explore. And let me just break down, for the sake of review, what each of these lines does here. So the first one is D down. So we're gonna have like a downward slope. Then we'll have a flat section. Then we'll have an upward ramp. This pen doesn't work right in that direction. Then we'll have a downward ramp, the same length. Then we'll have another flat section. We'll skip this for a minute. Then we'll have another flat section down here like this, and then I'll explain these in a minute. So these two OBS lines are for the obstacles. 0 means it's in the back lane, and 1 means it's in the front lane. So if we put all this together on the bottom of the screen, it'll look like this. We got a downward segment like that, flat part, a little jump, flat part, and then another flat part. And we have two obstacles. I'll make a different color for those. One is going to be right in the 0 means it's in the back, so I have one obstacle here. And then this 1 means it's in the front, so I have an obstacle here. So if we play pico-8 right now, we should see exactly that level. I will narrate all of the chunks of the level to you. Here we go. We got a downward slope, quite a long downward slope, a flat section, a ramp, a flat section. There's our first obstacle that we just ran right over in the back plane, just like we said. There's our next obstacle in the front lane, and that's the end of the level, and you can see the sort of exit ramp at the end of the level, which currently doesn't attach nicely to the end of the level, but let's just forget that we saw that. It kind of works. That's kind of the full extent of the existing obstacle system. One of the limitations that we run into right away is that the only obstacle sprite that we can use is this gray one, which should be right up here, right there. So that gray fella is the only way we can draw an obstacle at present. But as I said, I want to do grassy stuff. I want the snow to be melting. So a little patch of ice like this is not going to cut it. So this is the first and probably the easiest change we can make to our parser. Okay, I pulled up the actual code editor so you can see the level that we were just looking at here. And kind of ideally what I want to do is give each obstacle a sprite number. So if we look at pico-8, we can see our little gray patch of ice. And that's this sprite right here, which is number 160. So if I wanted the patch of ice, I would just write like 160 here. But let's say I wanted something else. Let's say I wanted my obstacle to look like this green patch, or this cool little sprout that I drew, and this other cool little sprout that I drew. So in that case, let's say this guy's 96. So I would instead make this 96, right? Fairly straightforward. Just be able to list the sprite number on the obstacle line so that we can have different looking sprites. Here we're looking at the code that adds the obstacle to like the level structure. There's a couple things to notice here. One is this split statement. So every line of the level code, every line of this, we read that in one at a time and we split it apart by commas. And then we can look at each piece in our little vals array here, or our vals table. So in our case, this OBS part would be vals 1. The plane that the obstacle is going to live on would be vals 2. And then this thing that we're not using yet, the sprite number, would be in vals 3. So here you can see, if vals 1 is OBS, so if it's an obstacle, and check it out down here, we're just hard coding the sprite to 160. But we don't want to do that anymore, right? We want to pull that in from vals 3. So the easy way to do it would just be to say vals 3, like that. But I already have a bunch of obstacle statements that don't have a third value, that don't have a sprite number, and I don't want to go back and edit those. So I'm going to add a little cheat here that just says what this little and or trick is doing is just saying if vals 3 exists, then use it. But if it doesn't, we're going to default to 160, which is our gray friend that we've been using from before, this fella right here. So now if we reload and check it, we should be able to see different sprites. Let me go back to the level actually and add that now. So rather than 160, let's add this one, 115. All right, should be coming up on that obstacle. And hey, there it is, it's green now, good. So now we can display grass. And if we keep going, and there's the other one. So now we know we can edit in whatever sprites we want for the obstacles. We can even edit in the player's head and torso as an obstacle if we want to. And it will slow us down as expected. The next thing we said we'd add is the ability to put multiple obstacles in a row. So if I want to have like a stretch of 3 little patches of ice or a long stretch of melted snow that exposes the grass, how can I put that into the level notation? I can actually think of a couple of different ways of approaching this. One would be to add another entry into this row. So let's say it's an obstacle, it's in the back plane, we use sprite number 12, and we want 3 in a row of those. That's like one way we could do it. The reason I don't like this is because now I've got these 3 sort of numerical entries on the end of each line, and I have to keep straight in my head which one is which. For some reason 2 is okay, but 3 feels like too much. I think because the middle one is always 0 or 1, so that makes it fairly easy to keep track of. But if I start adding more entries to this, it's going to get confusing reading the level format, and I don't want to be confused when I'm looking at my own levels. The other way we can do this is sort of the brute force way, which is just to have 1 line per obstacle. So I'm going to give this approach a shot. Now, I know that this isn't going to work, and I'm going to show you that it doesn't work, and then I'm going to explain why. So we've added 4 obstacles in a row, so if we replay this level, we should see the player's head and torso appear on the track 4 times in a row. So let's have a look and see what actually happens. Okay, coming up, and okay, so there's only 1. But why? Why is there only 1? Well, let me jump back to Paint and I can explain really quickly what happened here. Even though we've got 4 obstacles, we're only seeing 1. What happened to the other 3? We know that the level builder is building the other segments of the course correctly, right? It's building the flat parts and it's building the ramps correctly. So maybe if we examine what's going on there, it'll give us a hint as to why the obstacles are not working the way we would expect. You'll notice that every other segment has an X value associated with it, like a length. And what happens is when we load this level chunk into the level builder, we're keeping track of that X value for every chunk that we add. Initially, we have this downward ramp, and when we're done drawing it, X is 512. The flat segment that comes after it adds another 256 pixels, so that puts us at x equals 768. After that, we add this upward ramp, and that's only 16 pixels, so that puts us at x equals 784, etc., etc., etc. This works up until the obstacles. You'll notice this 0 and 1 are not x values, they're y values, essentially. They're like which lane does the obstacle appear in. So the x value doesn't advance here. So if we put 4 obstacles, one right after another, they're all going to have the same x coordinate, and they'll all appear right on top of each other. And that is, in fact, the behavior that we saw. Let's say, for example, our x at this point is, I don't know, we'll keep it simple. Our x at this point is only 256 after this first flat segment. We add our first obstacle at 256. Then we add our next obstacle, and what's our x value? It's still 256. Still 256. Still 256. So what we're looking at in pico-8, it looks like one obstacle, but it's actually 4. They're just all right on top of each other. This is the problem we have to solve. How do we tell the level builder, the parser, to advance 8 pixels, or whatever the width of the obstacle is, for every obstacle that it reads? The way that we can resolve this with a little bit of a hack is to leverage the fact that we already have a flat segment. Really, what we want to do when we say we want to advance the x coordinate 8 pixels is say that after each obstacle, we actually want to put a flat of 8 right after it. But we don't want to include that in our level string here just because it's annoying to do that each time. So instead what we'll do is just inject it secretly in code. So whenever we read an obstacle line, we will secretly put a flat 8 right after it. We can see the relevant code here, and it's pretty obvious that this is our culprit because it says if the ramp type that we're looking at from the level parse, or the level chunk, is not an obstacle, then we add a range, and we add whatever the current range is, whether that's a flat part, an up ramp, a down ramp, whatever. So if we're reading an obstacle line, we're completely skipping over this logic, and we're not advancing the current x coordinate. So what we're going to do is add the fix here. The fix has 2 parts. So if we see an obstacle line in our level, we're going to add a flat segment of 8 pixels long. I added this helper function here. There's a particular format for the level range that has a start and end coordinate, so I just wrote a helper function to abstract that out of the way and make the code above a little bit easier to read. So here we go. If we see an obstacle, we add a flat stretch of 8 pixels long, and we advance our little x coordinate, our x current, by 8 pixels. That should allow the obstacles to appear one after another because each one is 8 pixels wide. All right, let's reload and see where we're at. Hey, 4 torsos right where they should be. Perfect. Okay, so that's 2 problems solved. Let's keep going. The next thing I wanted to add was putting obstacles on ramps. So let's see if we can get rid of these torsos and actually make an obstacle looking thing to put on a ramp. All right, so I've made some changes off camera. Sorry, but I wanted to make some graphical updates. The normal level is using this sort of gray and white sort of snow and ice aesthetic, these sort of components for the ramps and the course. Because this new level, I wanted it to be a lot of melting snow and exposed grass, I'm now going with this green and brown aesthetic. So here are the little pieces that I'm using to do that. If I make this a little bigger, there you go. You can kind of get an idea like that, as opposed to something like this. So when this all comes together, it looks something like this. So you can see, again, a lot more green and ragged, patches of grass, brown everywhere. It's a little harder to see, but the trails that the player is leaving behind are also green instead of gray. So a lot of this is done with just changing some configuration, but some of it is going to tie in nicely to how we're going to get the obstacles onto the ramps. So let me go kind of under the hood a little bit and demonstrate how the levels are being built up. So pico-8 has this nice map interface thing that will let you, if we zoom out, you can see, let you kind of build up levels if you want inside like a map editor. So you could see one way to use this, and one way that I think the pico-8 demos use this is to actually build the levels themselves inside this map editor. Another way to use it is just to like throw a bunch of freaking tiles in there and reference them. So rather than building out full levels, you can just kind of build chunks of levels, and then in your code, you can kind of point to those chunks and programmatically build up the levels that you want. So you can see here, the sort of standard snow and ice levels are all built up out of these 7 sort of columns of tiles. Let me draw some highlights. This bit right here. There are only like 3 different columns of level that can appear. There's either flat stuff, there's upward ramps, and there's downward ramps, and that's it. I added a few variations of each one so that you get a little bit of graphical variety, especially like along the bottom section here. It's nice to have a little bit of a jagged edge. Shout out late 90s R&B group, Jagged Edge. But that's really all there is to it. So when we go back and read in that sort of string level notation that I had earlier, whenever I see like a flat segment, I just grab one of these columns. And then whenever I see an up ramp, I grab either one of these 2. And then whenever I see a down ramp, I grab either one of these 2. Now, if we want to have a different color scheme for our level with the greens and the browns and the organic stuff, we gotta have some new level chunks to work with. So I've added those here. So you can see I've just like got, again, 3 flat chunks, 2 upward ramp chunks, 2 downward ramp chunks. So it's kind of the same idea. I can just, when I'm building up the level, point to the data in the map editor here and sort of like build up the level 8 pixels at a time, 1 slice at a time. So the final result of all that is this. Oh man, those obstacles really slow me down. Everything looks green and brown. We've got ramps. Everything is just kind of a different color scheme now. And this is all going to be related to when we put obstacles onto ramps. So let's see if we try to do this naively. Let's go back to our level notation and try to come up with a way to specify a ramp that also has an obstacle on it. You can see here is our existing notation for an upward ramp. So we're just going to do a short 8 pixel up, 8 pixel down ramp here. And if we want to make this an obstacle ramp, that is a ramp with an obstacle on it, my thought is just to add a little tag on the end like this. Now, even though I earlier said that I don't want to make each of these entries too complicated, I think doing this as a string makes it a little bit easier to read. Earlier, I was concerned that adding like yet another digit onto the end of these things gets a little difficult to read. But in this case, we're just adding OBS, so it makes it clear like, yes, this is an upward ramp with an obstacle on it. I think that's pretty easy to remember, so I'm comfortable just adding OBS here. Now we just have to figure out how to get this into the parser to make it draw the obstacles on the ramps. So let's make a first attempt at doing this naively. Whenever we see OBS in the 4th position of like a level chunk, which would be here, for example, we can be sure that, at least given our current notation, this means we have an obs ramp or an obstacle ramp. I added a little helper function here to create that obstacle. We're going to throw that obstacle into our queue, and what that's going to do is place the obstacle directly on the ramp. So with no other changes, let's see what happens when we just load this up. And to make things a little easier to see, I'm going to enable drawing the bounding boxes. So there'll be like a little bit of extra boundary drawn around the obstacles to make them kind of pop out so you can see where they are. Okay, there we go. Positionally, that makes sense, but it's not really what I had in mind. What I wanted to kind of display was the grass kind of totally covering that ramp in grass, not just having like a little bit at the bottom there, because I don't want the intention to be like, or the assumption to be like, oh, if I just like scooch past that little bit of grass on the bottom, I'll be fine, when actually like the whole ramp should present as being off limits for the snowboarder to travel over it. So I want to make a graphical change here. I'm going to actually take advantage of that map slicing thing that I demonstrated here and create a new slice of level that is only for this obstacle ramp. And I've drawn that here, and you can sort of, it's a little bit hard to see when it's not in the context of a full level, but you can see the upper half of this ramp is just like covered with grassy looking stuff now. So it's really kind of off-putting if you've been trained to this point to avoid the green patches by knowing that they're going to slow you down. The issue is, how in the heck am I going to get this thing into the level? Well, we're just going to use a little workaround. We already know that every time we see a line in our level notation, we're picking either a flat segment or an upward ramp or downward ramp. Now if we see one of these obstacle ramps, we're just going to pick this bottom slice for the upward part instead of the top slice. And currently this was only going to allow us to do like obstacles on the top half of the ramp. Later on I might add stuff on the bottom, but the principle is the same. The critical part of the code that handles this is just right here. So I've already defined this range.map property. What this means is a range is just an 8 pixel wide slice of the level. I probably could have called it slice in retrospect. And the map is, remember when I said earlier that for every 8 pixel slice, we're just pointing to some location in the map data. So if it's flat, we just point here or here. If it's an upward ramp, we point here, and so on and so forth. Well, what this is saying is, if we have some entry in vals 4, this is sort of like a shorthand for saying this is an obstacle ramp, then don't point to our usual upward ramp. Don't point to this. Instead, point to this, right? We're pointing to 32.5 or 32 and 5 on the pico-8 map editor. As you can see down in the very, very bottom of the screen in the red horizontal bar, it says x32, y5. That's what this is. We're pointing to this little slice of level. So now, if we load it up, we should see something a little bit closer to what we want. Okay, not bad. Now, we're actually drawing the sprite on top of the obstacle ramp, which we probably don't need, but we've got both here. So the collision for the sprite still makes sense. That's what the orange bounding box is for. And now the ramp, like I said, that top lane there looks like gnarly. Like it's like totally off-putting for the player. So the idea is that they'll see that and kind of navigate towards the bottom of the ramp. One other change though I would like to make is actually to put an additional obstacle right before this ramp. So it's like a longer drawn out patch of grass, both to serve as like a bigger penalty for the player if they decide to brave that part of the ramp for some reason, but also to sort of be more of a obvious visual deterrent to keep them from going that way. So let's see, we can add, like similar to how we added that 8 pixel wide slice as a hack when we were doing the obstacles. I'm gonna add like secretly another obstacle right before this ramp whenever we see an obstacle ramp in our level notation. Similar idea here to what we did before when I added this new obs ramp. I've just added another helper function, new pre-obs ramp, which is just creating a new obstacle object with the right coordinates, throwing it into the queue, which means whenever we come into this obs ramp thing in our level notation, we're actually adding 2 obstacles to the queue at the same time. So again, the notation stays relatively short, but the amount of info that we're packing into that one line of just like this one little line here where we're putting obs at the end, that fires off these 2 objects. So they're automatically added into the level. And what that's going to look like when we run it is that. So now we've got a much longer obstacle with a lot more grass in front of the ramp. And let me turn off the bounding boxes to make it a little bit easier to see like what it kind of looks like at the end there. And that's what it looks like after we've added that pre-obstacle. I don't hate that, but actually what I'm noticing is repeating the same sprite, that same green patch of grass twice in a row, rather than just letting this thing that I've drawn kind of speak for itself, makes it look a little bit repetitious. So I think what I'm going to do is hide. I'm going to make that second obstacle, the one that's actually on the ramp, I'm going to make it invisible, right? What's happening is there's a sprite that's overlaying the map data that I've drawn. And so it's kind of creating like the same patch of grass 2 times in a row. But I think if I just set a nil sprite for that ramp thing, it'll look a little bit better. Let me try that. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Again, there's like kind of a solid green line in between there, but I think I can live with that. It looks like there's a little bit more variety there at least, which I'm happy with. Actually, no, let me tweak it one more time and try and get those 2 green bits to connect. Oh, there we go. Okay, I just tweaked the spawn point of that pre-ramp sprite or that pre-ramp obstacle a little bit so it connects to the map data nicely. So that's better. It's a lot less repetitious. It's a lot kind of more random looking. A lot of grass on that ramp. Now we know it's an obstacle. And in case you're wondering, the collision still totally works. Even though the player goes upwards a little bit, they still manage to clip that obstacle along the ramp, and that slows them down. So we've done it. We've now added everything that we wanted for the obstacle ramp, at least for the top half. Maybe someday I'll go back and add a little bit more logic to accommodate obstacles on the bottom half, but for now, I'm pretty happy with this accomplishment. I like the way it looks. I think it's pretty obvious that you don't want to snowboard on that part because it's all green. There was one more thing that I wanted to show off before I wrap this level parser party up, which is more of like a tip or like one takeaway that I came across by myself that, I don't know, maybe it'll serve you in your adventures in level editing. And that is visible here in the level format that I'm showing off here. You may have noticed this as I was looking at the level data before and been like, what is going on? So as I was building out these levels, let me go to a part that doesn't have any of these comments in it. These can get really difficult to like read when they get long. It's like, I know what each of these segments do, but the patterns become less obvious. So it was getting really difficult to build levels up just based on strings. So what I did is I allowed myself to put comments in to the level data, and each of these lines gets read in by the level parser, just like the flat part and the B up and the B down. And in these kind of strings, normally within Lua, you can't just put comments. Like you can put comments in code blocks, but in sort of these long string literals, you're not allowed to put comments in the middle. But I wanted them because I wanted to be able to say like, oh, this is the short weave back and forth at the beginning, and this is the downward slope into the long weave, and here's like, where's my little obstacle ramp bit? Here's like the first appearance of the obstacle ramp and stuff like that. So as I was editing the level, I could kind of ground myself a little bit better. So all I did was I added a little bit of logic to the parser so that when it splits this line apart, if we see this double dash, which is the same as the Lua comment syntax, if we see this double dash at the beginning of the first segment, we know it's a comment, we just ignore that line. So again, this isn't really part of the game. It was more like a developer experience thing that I added that made it way easier for me to edit my like gnarly string-based level notation. So if you're gonna do this route and do your levels as strings and build a parser around that, this is something I would actually recommend adding early on just to make your life a little bit less bonkers when you go to edit your levels. So that's how I expanded the level notation and that parser to make a level that, you know, feels distinct and looks distinct. And I'm actually really satisfied with how this turned out. Like, it definitely does not look or feel like any of the other levels. And that's all a result of those parser updates that I made. So, you know, if you're working in an environment like pico-8, where you're sort of constrained and you're exploring doing a string notation for your levels, hopefully some of this will come in handy down the road. Anyway, thanks for your time. We're really grinding to a halt here on these obstacles. Thanks for your time and your attention. I appreciate all of you, and I really appreciate you investing your time on this channel and on this video. If you enjoyed it, shoot me a like, subscribe if you want to see more of this. It does make a difference. Again, I have been Eric, this has been Radical Slice, and I will catch you all soon.